Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming, and probably even more importantly, thank you for your support and commitment to helping the community. My name is John Greenberg, and I, along with Dahlia Oppenheimer, are the co-chairs of the 2024 St. Louis Jewish Community Study, which is what we're here to talk about. I suspect as we go through, everybody will have lots of questions, and for that reason, everybody in their seat should have pen and paper. The way we're going to do this, just so that we can get through the evening and we can provide you with all the information that you need, is we're going to go through the PowerPoint presentation, or the Brandeis folks will, in a moment. And when we're finished with that, we'll go to a Q&A session. So please hold your questions until that point, and be sure to write them down on the cards with the pen that's provided, and we'll make sure we can answer as many questions as possible when we get to that point. So to set the table for tonight's discussion, we want to start by sharing with you the fundamental question that our friends at Brandeis presented to us as we were trying to fashion the questions for the study. And that is, what would you do if you knew? And that, of course, is the ultimate question, because what the community study is, first and foremost, is a planning tool for us to use to continue to improve our community. That's what we did with the 2014 demographic study. That study was used by Federation to establish our core commitments, as well as to prioritize community planning and investment decisions. It was also used by many of the partner organizations in the community to identify geographic markets that were underserved, services that were underserved, and to make planning accordingly. And that too is the goal of this 2024 study. As Dahlia will expand upon in a couple of minutes, we spent a lot of time coming up with these questions, and for a lot of you in the room involved with other organizations in the community, we heard you and made sure those questions were asked as well. One of the things that we did in addition to planning for this community study, which is a demographic study that Brandeis helped us with, we also put into our budget another type of study for the first time, which is a market study that focuses on the why. A demographic study focuses on the who we are and what we think, and who we are and where we are in the community, but not necessarily the why, why we're thinking the way that we're answering those questions. And the market study will give us an opportunity to do that for the first time.
How we choose to navigate this terrain is the journey that we begin here tonight. As it was 10 years ago, the power of this data will be in the questions it raises, the unseen needs that come to the surface, and the closer look at the evolving landscape of meaningful Jewish experience and engagement. It's a terrain that was developed with a bias toward action. Over the summer of 2023, the task force brainstormed about every question you could think of to include in such a study. We listened carefully to what many lay and professional leaders from across our community wanted to learn about, and consulted numerous studies from other communities. The Brandeis litmus test of what would you do if you knew was our compass in narrowing things down. But as the questionnaire was finalized in October 2023, Jews across the world were coming to the realization that the safety, security, and allyship we thought we knew disappeared all too quickly. And while we did delay survey launch out of respect for the difficulty of that time, we also redoubled our commitment to moving forward. The world will never be the same as it was October 6, 2023. The way Jews interact with their community, with their own Judaism, has changed. That is the mindset to take when you hear the data. Focus on the now, on the forward, and seek out opportunities to connect. Where can we collaborate? Where might we pivot? Where do we keep going? In biblical times, the census of the Jewish people was conducted every year, counted by the contribution of a half shekel each. In true Jewish fashion, there are multiple interpretations of this amount. but there are two key learnings that are hopefully beyond debate. The first is that every voice, regardless of means, must be counted. And secondly, a half shekel cannot be full without its partner, a connection to another. The question at this time is, where can we go now that we know? And even more importantly, and how can we go there together? To kick us off on that journey, please join me in warmly welcoming our new CEO, Danny Cohn.
Good evening. As we gather tonight to reflect on our community and its future, I am reminded of the words of the beloved song, Hine ma tovu menayim, Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. How good and pleasant it is when brothers and sisters dwell together in unity. This verse from Tehillim captures the essence of our Jewish community in St. Louis. We are here not just as individuals, but as a collective, working together to build something greater than ourselves. It is an honor to be with you today as the new CEO of the Jewish Federation in St. Louis. As I step into this role, I want to express my deep gratitude for the warm welcome I've received from so many of you already. This is a community with a rich history, strong institutions, and most importantly, a deep commitment to creating and sustaining a vibrant Jewish life. I felt it when I visited here for interviews. This was a major factor that sold me on moving to St. Louis. I can't wait for my husband and my daughter to join me here permanently this summer and explore the Jewish community with them. In the coming weeks and months, I'm looking forward to spending time and to getting to personally know each of the organizations, agency, and people who comprise this special community. Of course, please don't hesitate to reach out if there's an event or an engagement you'd like me to join. There's no better way to learn about you than being with you, and I look forward to every opportunity. Just ask and I will do my absolute best to be present. By way of introduction, my professional background is in community building, storytelling, and strategic leadership. I've had the privilege of working with organizations that understand the power of data, collaboration, and engagement in shaping the future, and that is exactly what brings us here tonight. The 2024 Greater St. Louis Jewish Community Study is a critical investment by Federation in our collective future. Thank you to our community study co-chairs, Dalia Oppenheimer and John Greenberg, for your leadership and guidance, and to the entire Community Study Advisory Committee and Federation staff, led by Karen Scher, Scott Berzon, Andy Tevlin, Amanda Miller, David Stetter, Emily Bornstein, and Nava Cantor, who took great care and pride in delivering this to you. This research gives us more than just numbers. It provides us a roadmap for understanding who we are, how we connect to a Jewish life, and where we must focus our efforts to grow and sustain a thriving Jewish community. This study, conducted in partnership with top research institutions, the Cohn Center for Modern Jewish Studies at Brandeis University and NORC at the University of Chicago, tells us not just where we stand today, but where we need to go. We have learned that Jewish St. Louis is diverse, engaged, and evolving. We see incredible strengths, strong community, connections, high level of philanthropy, and meaningful participation in Jewish life. But we also see some challenges. Financial barriers to participation, concerns about anti-Semitism, and demographic shifts that mirror national trends. As we reflect on this moment, I am reminded of the wisdom from Pirkei Avot. It is not your duty to finish the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. This is the essence of our mission. The work of strengthening Jewish life in St. Louis is ongoing. We may not complete it in our time, but we must commit ourselves to its progress. Federation's role has always been to listen and lead, to convene and to collaborate. We will use the data to inform our priorities, to support our partners, and to team up with all of you to build a more inclusive, welcoming, and dynamic Jewish future. So tonight, we will dive into the study's findings, explore what they mean, and most importantly, begin the conversation about how we work together to leverage our shared passion for our Jewish community. With that, I'd like to introduce the study researchers, Dr. Matthew Bruckner, Associate Research Scientist, and Dr. Janet Krasner-Aronson, Associate Director at the Cohen Center for Modern Jewish Studies and Steinhardt Social Research Institute at Brandeis. Again, thank you for being here, for your commitment to the Jewish community of St. Louis, and for being part of this journey. I look forward to writing our next chapter together. Have a good evening.
Thanks so much to all of you for those warm introductions. I'm Janet Aronson, as Danny mentioned. I'm the Associate Director of the Cohen Center at Brandeis University. On behalf of the center, I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to work with you, to learn about your community. We have studied over 25 communities over the last decade or so, and each time we work with a community, we hope that we give you the opportunity to learn, but we learn so much. We're trying to understand the whole tapestry of American Jewish life, which is fascinating, always evolving. And from each community, we learn new issues that we should think about. We get new questions that we should ask and new topics to consider. So thank you for inviting us into this process. We've already talked about the goals of the study, so I won't spend too much time on this, but I do want to emphasize that our goal is not to dictate, to suggest what you need to do, or to evaluate the quality of the community. Our goal is simply to describe, to give you a rich portrait of who is here, what they're thinking about, what they're doing, and give you the information that you need to set your own goals and move forward in what would a thriving community look like to you. I just want to start with some definitions about who is in the community. We consider the Jewish community to include Jewish adults. Those are people who say that they're Jewish and either have at least one Jewish parent or they've converted to Judaism. Jewish children are those whose parents say, I think my child is Jewish. And Jewish households are households in which there is at least one Jewish adult. So this is the scope of the survey. Our goal is to produce accurate and actionable results. Now, if you ever read the news and you ever read anything about polls, survey research, any kind of research, you may know that this is getting very, very, very much harder to do in recent years. People don't answer their phone. People don't read their email. They get invitations. They all go to spam. It is very hard to reach people to get them to take a survey. So I want to ask, how many people in this room took this survey? If you can't remember, you could raise your hand. So that's wonderful. And the good news, it's a lot of you, but it's not all of you. Why is that important? Because we already know a lot about all the people in this room, and a lot of our efforts went to learn about people who are not in this room, who wouldn't show up at a Federation event. So I'm glad to see that you are represented, but that you're not the only ones represented. So the methodology is hard. That's why we work with our partners at NORC, who are one of the leading social science research organizations in the country. And we rely on them to make sure that our methods are the most up to date. As you're listening to the results, which my colleague Matt, who was the principal investigator of this study and knows every number, as he presents it. Here's some questions that you might want to think about and perhaps write on your cards. So think about what's surprising to you. And then the opposite, what's validating, what confirms what you expect. Think about whether it's your work as a volunteer, as a Jewish professional, or just as a member of the community. What information might you be able to use that would inform your work, inform your thinking about your engagement in Jewish life? And then, what would you like to know more about? And I will say that the information we're presenting tonight is just the tip of the iceberg. The brochure that you have in front of you is more. There is an almost 200-page report with more, and a data set with even more. So there is so much for you to learn, but so there are opportunities to go deeper into what we've already collected, and as we heard, there'll be more opportunities to research and understand the community. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Matt to present you the numbers.
Thank you, Janet, and again, thank you everyone for coming out tonight, for your support of this work. It's been a real pleasure to work with the folks at Federation with this over the last 2 years, and it's really exciting to be here delivering the results of that hard labor to you. Okay. So we estimate there are about 60,000 people living in about 27,000 Jewish households in the greater St. Louis area. That includes about 46,000 Jewish individuals, adults and children, and 15,000 adults and children who are not Jewish. Now that about a quarter of the people who live in Jewish households are not Jewish, and in fact, we see when we look at people's relationships and who they partner with, that of the people who are married or are living with their romantic partner, about half are partnered with someone who is Jewish, and about half are partnered with someone who is not Jewish. That's a relatively higher than average intermarriage rate, the rate of people who are not partnered with someone who's Jewish. Nationally, it's in the low 40%. But what's important to note is despite that, as I'll get into children later on in the presentation, there's a very high rate, even among intermarried parents, of raising their kids Jewish in some way. And of the remaining children who aren't considered Jewish by their parents, most are being raised with no religion. Relatively few are some other religion entirely. Now, in terms of where people live, the community over sort of prevailing historical patterns right now is more urban and exurban than it has been. The plurality of Jewish households are still living in the traditional suburban centers around where we are now. But 22% of households are in the city, and then 13% are in the exurbs, so St. Charles County, and some of the other counties as well. Particularly, younger adults, 20 and 30-somethings, are disproportionately living in the city in those outer counties. Very few, relatively, of them are living in the traditional historical suburban centers of Jewish life in the St. Louis area. This provides a real opportunity for thinking about where organizations and where the community, capital C community, can focus its efforts in expanding its offerings. Okay. The report has a wealth of information about the demographic characteristics of Jewish residents in the St. Louis area, and I'm only going to touch on a very select number of things. So for example, age. Over half of Jewish adults in the St. Louis area are over age 50. You can look at the red lines at the sort of 50. Whereas under half, 45%, of the general population in the area are over age 50. So the Jewish community is older than the surrounding population. It also runs a little bit older than the national Jewish population. But the report has other information about the Jews' racial and ethnic identities, gender identity, LGBTQ plus identity, countries of origin, a wealth of other information. Just in terms of the makeup of the households in the Jewish community, about a quarter include minor children under age 18. Another 38% have couples who are not living with children. They may be, they don't have children yet, or they're never planning on having children. They might be empty nesters. Their children have moved out. Another 29% are singles or people living with unrelated roommates. And then the final share are what we call multi-generational households. Those are adult children and their parents. So it could be the parents are middle-aged and the children are younger, or it could be the children are middle-aged and their parents are older. Okay, so now we're gonna attempt a little technological thing that hopefully will work. If you guys can switch over to the first Menti. So if you go to Menti. If everyone could go, please, to menti.com, menti.com, and enter in that numeric code. I can't get a great angle from here. Hold on. Okay, yeah. 114 11052. Yes, 114 11052. Okay. So, right, hopefully you're seeing the question asking how long you've lived in the area. Yes, the number is 114. Oh, wonderful. You just showed it on my little screen here. 114 11052. Okay, we'll give this a few more seconds. Yes, 114 11052. Right. Does anyone have ticket number 114 11052? Okay. So I think what this illustrates, most of you have been here for a while. If we could switch back to the slide deck, please.
Could you give the number again?
Right. So one of the characteristics of this community, I think we're yeah. Yeah, that's true. There will be a couple of more of these little fun technical experiments. So it'll be the same number, I think. So we'll come back to that. But what's important to note about this community is that most of the Jews in St. Louis have long-standing ties to the area. 2/3 of you have lived here for 20 years or longer. That includes 30% of you who have been here for your whole lives and have never lived anywhere else. Half of the community were raised here, so that means that 20% or so moved away and came back. And over half of households in the St. Louis Jewish community have close relatives in other households. So your parents, adult children, siblings. So there are long-standing multi-generational ties in this community. You've grown up with other members of the community. Your parents did. Maybe your grandparents and great-grandparents did. And that can be a real source of strength. It can also be a challenge for the people who have not been here for generations. And in fact, a quarter of the community have been here for under a decade, right? 16% for under 5 years, another 7% for 5 to 9 years. The people who've moved here recently within the last decade, we ask why they came, and by the way, most come for education and stay, or they come for their work. As I'll get into a little later on, for these newcomers, there can be challenges to finding ways of integrating themselves into such a long-standing, pre-existing Jewish community. But exactly. But before we get there, I'm going to turn it back over to Janet, who's going to talk about the way we think about Jewish engagement and analyze Jewish engagement in the study.
And there'll be a quiz after this one too, so pay close attention. When we think about Jewish engagement, what comes to mind for most people is Jewish denominations. This is the model that has been used for decades, more, to understand Jewish life. So this is the profile of Jewish denominations in St. Louis. And this is asking adults, what denomination do you identify with? It doesn't have to do with what synagogue they're a member of. And you can see, and this compares it to the national numbers, and what I hope will jump out is if you compare the share who are Reform, it's 45%, much higher than the national number. And that is by far the largest denomination in St. Louis. The second largest denomination is no denomination. The people who say they're just Jewish, or this doesn't apply to me, or they're secular cultural Jews. Now, we often think about people who would say that as being completely unengaged in Jewish life, but that turns out not to be the case. That's one of the problems with this model of Jewish engagement. The other problem is, in general, people who are Orthodox have fairly similar patterns of Jewish life, but when you think about people who are conservative or Reform, they can span such a wide range of Jewish life, from being active in their synagogue and there every week, to people who are not members of a synagogue at all, but maybe that was the denomination they grew up with. So saying that you're conservative or Reform doesn't really tell us that much about what your Jewish life looks like.
Your total U.S. Jews number, is that in 25 studies, or is that?
No, that is from the Pew study from 2020 of the National Jewish Study. So it's Pew, okay? If you're familiar with that. Okay, thanks for the clarification. There's another problem with this model of Jewish engagement. When you think about denomination, you mostly think about synagogues, you think about Jewish holidays, you think about Jewish ritual, and you don't really think about, are they members of the J? Or do they read Jewish books? Or do they go to Jewish programs? Or all of the non-religious ways of being Jewish. So, because of the limitations of this denomination model of Jewish life, we've developed a new model that we call the Index of Jewish Engagement. This is something we've been working on for 10 years. It's a way of analyzing Jewish life, although the method has been in existence for 10 years. This model is unique to St. Louis. It is based on your data. So basically, we look at a set of behaviors. Instead of asking people, what do you call yourself? We ask them questions about, what do you do? How often do you go to Jewish programs? How often do you mark Shabbat in any way? How often do you read news about Israel? How often do you read a Jewish book or watch a Jewish film? So we have all these behaviors, and we put them together statistically, and we look at the patterns of Jewish behavior. And we look at, say, oh, here's a group of people that are kind of similar. They do similar things. And then here's another group that does a different set of things. And we've identified 5 groups, and they're presented to you here. And I won't read the whole list, but I'm going to point out a few interesting things. We have a group of about a quarter of Jewish adults who are what we call minimally involved. They do very few Jewish things. They're not in organizations. They may do Jewish things at home. Then I'll skip the others, but I want to go to the communal and ritual group. Those are the two highest Jewish engagement groups. And why they say high? Because they are strongly connected to the Jewish life and Jewish community, but they show it in different ways. So the communal group are the people who are involved in organizations. They attend programs. They donate. They're members. Now, they may do some ritual activities, but their primary focus is their Jewish communal life. The ritual group, which is about the same size, is really focused on religious life. They're celebrating Shabbat, going to services, members of synagogues, and they're also highly engaged in Jewish life, but different aspects of Jewish life. So you can see from this, which I'll walk you through, that this is related to denomination, but it's not exactly the same. So if you look at the top row here, not the all Jewish adults, but the minimally involved row, you can see that of the people who are minimally involved, 72%, that's the number over to the right, have no Jewish denomination. Kind of makes sense that a big share of those people have no denomination. But if you look down at the bottom row, of the people in the ritual group, 13% of them have no Jewish denomination. So we have this group of people who say they have no denomination, but they are as involved in Jewish life as many people, as the most involved people in the community. The other thing that you could see, which is interesting, is in going down at the Reform column, you can see that there are a good number of Reform Jews in every single one of these groups. So Reform Jews really run the gamut of Jewish expression. I think I'm gonna skip through these for a moment. All of the information is in the report, but I want to get to what I think is important to illustrate this point. Even though we make these groups based on behaviors, the behaviors are correlated to attitudes. What does it mean to be Jewish? And in the report and in the brochure, you'll see all sorts of differences between these groups, demographic differences, behavior differences. But I want to point out these two attitudes. So one question we ask is, to what extent is being Jewish part of your daily life? And you can see just visually what a big difference there is across these groups, where of the minimally involved, most of them say Judaism is not part of my daily life. And of the ritual group, almost everybody says Judaism is part of my daily life. In contrast, we have this group where we say, to what extent do you feel part of the Jewish people around the world? This is to get this idea of peoplehood. And here you can see almost all the groups. Doesn't matter how you engage in Jewish life, most people feel connected to Jewish people around the world. So I want to just take a moment to talk about how would you use this? So what? One of the things that we think about is if you want to enhance Jewish engagement, we need to start with where people are. And you need to think about, as people engage in Jewish life, what might you do to enrich people's lives? We don't think of this as a ladder, that we're trying to move people along from minimally involved to ritual. We think of it as, here's a snapshot of here's what people are doing. And then you might take someone who's in, I didn't talk too much, the personal group, where they're doing Jewish things, but they're doing them at home. They're not involved in organizations. What might that person want? I wouldn't, reach out to them and say, ask them to join an organization. But I might think about what is it that they're doing at home, and can we provide resources to make that a richer experience? I'll mention, because I skipped one group, I'll just mention in the other group is the holiday group. Those are the people who step into Judaism a few times the year, often Hanukkah, have a Seder, maybe go on to services on high holidays. And so the rest of the year, Judaism is not important to them, but they step in on occasion. So I'd like you to think about this, and this is a framework for a lot of our work. One last thing is I want to emphasize, we did not define these groups and ask people on the survey, which one are you? We asked them, what do you do? And then we created these groups and named them. But now I have a chance for you to think about what group are you in. So we're going to go back to that Menti. And I'll read the code again. So it's the same code as before. It's menti.com. And the code is 11411052. Okay, and I'll just remind you as you're thinking what the groups are. I see them. I see them coming in already. So I don't have to remind you because they were clear. This is very fun to watch the numbers change. Okay. So I think that you're getting the picture of you in this room, by virtue of being in this room, are involved in communal life. Now, you may be involved in other aspects of Jewish life, certainly, but I think that this pattern is really clear. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Matt to present the rest of the data.
Great. Okay. So now I'm going to take the rest of our presentation time to share more highlights. The report covers a lot of ground, a lot of topics. We can't get through all of them, or even close to all of them tonight. So this is just a selection, but it's some of the findings that we think are particularly noteworthy and relevant. Okay, so I promised I would talk a little more about children. If you look at the pie chart, that is showing how, what is the parents, who are the parents of Jewish children, right? So a little over half of Jewish children have in-married parents, have two Jewish parents. A little over a third have intermarried Jewish parents, so they have one Jewish parent and one not Jewish parent. And then the remaining Jewish children are being raised by single parents. On the other half of the slide, the bar graphs, that's looking at how are parents raising their children based on whether they're two Jews or one Jew and one non-Jew. So as you would expect, most of the children of in marriage of two Jewish parents are being raised Jewish alone, nothing else. Some small numbers of exceptions to that. And over a half of the children of intermarriage are being raised Jewish. That's the dark blue shading, that's the Jewish alone, and the lighter blue shading, that's Jewish and another religion. That's still over half of them. Most of the remaining children of intermarriage who are not Jewish are not being raised in any religion, which is not to say that over the course of their family life, or the child's life, that they're not going to be involved, that they're, it is not to say that children will never be involved in Jewish life, right? This is a moment of time. It could be that children are young and before, the age of Jewish education. It could be, they're not ready for B'nai Mitzvah tutoring, and so they're just not thinking about it. These are not, immovable figures. Speaking of Jewish education, so half of K-12 students were enrolled in some form of Jewish education between the summer of 2023 and the end of the 23-24 academic year. So from June to June, 23 to 24. Within that, half of them, right, so 22% were enrolled in some form of Jewish schooling, whether that was a part-time Hebrew school, Sunday school, or a full-time day school or yeshiva. There are also participated in other year-round educational programs like youth group or tutoring. And about a third of them were either campers or staff at a Jewish summer camp, whether overnight or day camp, in 2 summers ago, in 2023. We also have lots of information around congregational life and ritual involvement. And again, this is just a selected highlight. Over 1/3 of households, Jewish households in Greater St. Louis, belong to a congregation. That's a synagogue, an independent minyan, a Chabad, or other Jewish prayer community. I'll just note at the onset here that that is one of the higher rates that we've studied over our decade plus of doing this work, okay? And even within that, 23% of households pay dues to a synagogue, and sort of if you think of synagogue member, right, that's the 23%. Again, incredibly high, relatively speaking, for the year. Well, I guess we did this 2024, but in the 2020s, those are very high rates. Okay. Notably, as Janet talked about, the high rate of Reform affiliation identification in this community, 1/4 of all households belong to Reform synagogue, whether they pay dues or they don't pay dues, right? And that's equivalent to 2/3 of member households. Of course, more people go to services and participate in Jewish ritual life than actually belong to a congregation. 2/3 attended services in the previous year, half for the high holidays. Okay. Our study also has lots of information about programs, organizational activities, memberships. So what I'm highlighting here are the types of programs that people participate in. So 68% of all Jewish adults attended a Jewish-sponsored program in the previous year. We asked everyone if they did certain kinds of activities not under Jewish sponsorship, and if they did activities under Jewish sponsorship. So what we see, for example, this top row, the most frequent kind of program of any sort is cultural programming. People like culture. But they're not necessarily going to do that through Jewish sponsorship. There's a plethora of cultural opportunities in a major metropolitan area like St. Louis for cultural programs, but many still do them through Jewish organizations. Further down the list, if you can see it, outdoor programs, however, are not getting very many participants in Jewish outdoor sponsorship. Most do them outside of that. However, of the many people do Jewish-sponsored social action programming. So just again, to illustrate the breadth and depth of data in the study, if any of you are involved in any sort of leadership capacity with organizations that do programming, you can think about what are the kinds of programs that people are drawn to. We also encourage you to think about what are the barriers that people encounter to their desired participation in Jewish life. Now, I want to note here, we did not ask these questions of everyone in the community. We asked them of the people who participated, so that 68% that I mentioned. We also asked them of the 20 additional % of adults who don't participate but are interested in participating. So that leaves, if you can do your basic mental arithmetic, 12% who don't participate and are not interested in participating in Jewish programs. So of that 88%, the most frequently cited barriers are not knowing people, inconvenient times, and uninteresting programs. But different groups of people are affected by these limitations at different rates. So for example, half of financially struggling households cite affordability as one of their barriers, compared to just 12% of the overall population. Similarly, half of the newcomers, people who've been here for under 5 years, cite not knowing people as a barrier, compared to 31% of everyone. We have a wealth of information about the community's pro-social behaviors, volunteering, and philanthropy. what I want to call out is that most people who are philanthropically involved or volunteering in the Jewish community are also doing it outside the Jewish community as well, right? 80% donate at all. That's including a little over half who donate both to Jewish and not Jewish, and 6% who donate only to Jewish, right? That's a much, much smaller number. Similarly, with volunteering, 21% volunteered for both Jewish and non-Jewish organizations versus 12% who volunteered only with Jewish organizations. We also have information, we're not going to share in the main part of our presentation, about what causes people are interested in for volunteering and donating to. But what I'll say is that the most popular cause that is explicitly Jewish is Jewish identity, engagement, and education. About 41% said that they were interested in that cause. And a similar number said that they were interested in the most popular, not specifically Jewish cause, which was education, both sort of younger education and also higher education. Okay. In terms of Israel, I think it's important just to remind of the context and the timing of when we did our survey. We did it in between June and April of last year, so it was a few months after October 7th, is when we fielded the survey. So this, the question, the responses take into account the post-October 7th reality, okay? So 3/4 of the community feels somewhat or very attached to Israel, and over half of Jewish adults have been there at least once. Now, again, travel to Israel does not necessarily mean that you're more attached, because travel is a function of affordability, time availability, and things like that. And in fact, over half of the people who've never been to Israel are very attached to Israel. Now, there's many areas of consensus in the community about Israel and people's views on Israel, although there are some areas of disagreement. By and large, most people agree that they want Israel to be a democratic state. By and large, most people agree that they also think that Israel should be a refuge for the Jewish people, that it's important for Israel to be a Jewish state, and that American Jews have the right to criticize Israel's government. Where there is less consensus is on whether people self-identify as Zionists. That doesn't necessarily mean they don't hold views that people would associate with Zionism, but they don't use that term for themselves. I think those two statements on the bottom are actually among the most critical in the study, because there are people who feel that their views about Israel are unwelcome in Jewish settings, and that they don't know enough about Israel to participate in conversations about it. You know, for that second one from the bottom about feeling that their views are unwelcome, I want to point out 11% of everyone strongly agreed with that statement. Among younger adults who are in their 20s and 30s, that jumps up to 28%. But it's not just within the Jewish community that younger adults are feeling some tension around Israel. We asked a series of questions about if people avoided certain behaviors out of fear of anti-Semitism. The most common response, 36%, said that they avoided mentioning Israel. Among younger adults, that was 71%, double. For all of the other avoidance behaviors, younger adults, greater shares of them avoided them more than older adults, but the gaps were much, much, much more narrow. So thinking about that younger adult population in particular, there's real challenges for how they think about and are talked about and talk about in terms of Israel. But in terms of some other context of what we gathered around people's experiences of anti-Semitism, 28% said they were personally targeted by anti-Semitism in the previous year. Most of those incidents were verbal, nonviolent, if not disheartening and discomforting, but there were still 3% who reported vandalism and 2% who reported a physical attack or the threat of one. So it's probably not a surprise that most people are concerned about anti-Semitism, 80% concerned about global anti-Semitism, and 47%, about half, who are very concerned about anti-Semitism here in the St. Louis area. Okay. We also have in the report a lot of information about the community's financial and health needs. This is a relatively affluent community, but there are still pockets of struggling, of households that are struggling. Right? 1% said that they cannot make ends meet. That is 1% too many. But there's also 17% who said that they're just managing to make ends meet. Those are the people you can think of who, as being a car accident, a medical emergency, a job loss, away from being in real financial trouble. The people who are treading water, so to speak. We also have in the study and report, and if there are questions about this, we can get into them, information about economic hardships that households faced, who's receiving public benefits, what financial services people need and are not getting, and what they need, and if they are getting them, who's providing them. Right. And finally, the last data slide that we have for you before any questions. A quarter of households include someone who's limited in work or school by a health issue, special need, or disability. Financially struggling households much more likely to have be in such a position. Those two, financial and health needs, are intertwined. But the most commonly faced health issues in the community are chronic illness, physical disability, and mental and emotional health needs. I'll note that, these are faced by different segments of the population differently. Younger adults, more likely to have mental and emotional health needs. Older adults, more likely to have physical health needs. Okay. So now that you've heard our whirlwind presentation summary of the community, we have one final little Menti exercise. So, what 1 or 2 words would you use to describe the Jewish community of Greater St. Louis? Again, the code, if you don't have it memorized by now, is 114-110-52. While you're doing that, if you have questions on your note card, please pass them to the ends, the outer ends of the aisles, and they'll be collected. Need more bagels. To be fair, I did say 1 to 2 words, and that is 3, but we'll allow it. Okay, 114-110-52. And again, if you have a note card with a question, you can pass them to the ends. They'll be collected by Federation staff. Thank you. Oh, my mom. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Well. Yeah, just no. I think it saves it. Yeah. It was great. We're seeing engaged, vibrant, diverse, connected, divided, caring. That's, what is that? Aging. It was great. Okay, I think, any more filtering in? Okay. All right. So I think we can switch back. Oh, wait, are we? Okay, so while we're waiting, then we'll let this go. So again, before we get into the Q&A, again, we want to thank you for coming out tonight. We want to thank the Federation staff and for all of your support, and the 1,771 people who filled out the survey last year. Our target was 1,200, so y'all did a good job.
Great.
Okay.
Matt, are you ready?
Karen, are you ready? Yeah.
We've got a bunch of questions here. The first one I'm going to ask is, what is the most positive piece of data in the report that you found?
Most positive. Well, I think, here, we'll just go back. We'll go to that. I think there's not sort of, I wouldn't look at one piece, one data point in isolation to talk about what I think is most positive or most striking about this community. It really is woven throughout, and that is how deeply involved there's a core of this community is. But it's not all in the same ways, which I think is really important. In many communities, it's always the same people who are the Federation donors and the JCC members and members of the largest congregations. And here that's much more diffuse. So there's a lot more people who are part of what you could consider the sort of core, involved members of the community, with a quarter belong to the JCC, right? Over a third belong to a congregation, 2/3 attend programs. So when you look at all of that together, I think that's a really just paints the picture of a really involved and committed community writ large, and not just the same people, small group of people who are always in the room, always doing the same things.
Great. We have a number of questions that are trying to compare, from 10 years ago. And maybe you can just share a little bit about the importance of looking at the study as a moment in time today and moving forward. But I know there's a number of questions around poverty, if we've seen a growth in poverty or a decrease, growth in population or a decrease. So if you could just speak to maybe some of those kinds of questions.
Right. So one of the complications of doing this work is that even small changes in a research methodology can have ramifications on how able we are to make direct comparisons from study to study. Even something as simple as question wording or slightly different response options means that they don't quite fit together so well to make that apples to apples comparison. The same thing goes for providing the estimates and for counting. The last study was using what at the time was known to be the state-of-the-art research methods, but that we subsequently learned were sort of transitioning out of being reliable, or had just transitioned out within the previous few years. So if we're thinking about what the population, the Jewish population of the area is now compared to the past, what I want to note is both that all of the investments and resources that were made, the decisions that were made based on findings from the last study were completely and 100% the right decisions to make, right? It doesn't invalidate anything that you thought about yourselves or your community or what you did because of it. And I also want to say that the general population trends in this area do point to a decrease in Jewish population, but that doesn't say anything, that's not a judgment on the nature of the Jewish community. People make decisions around where they live because of broader macroeconomic and social forces, not because Apparently, you can't get a good bagel here, is according to someone. So, you know, when thinking about a number, if you look at the report from 10 years ago versus now, you know, looking at what the population size is, it doesn't say anything about the, you know, it's not a qualitative evaluation of the Jewish community. It's just pointing to, this is using the best methodologies available, this is what the Jewish community is now. And as I said, it is one that is highly engaged and deeply involved across the wide range of Jewish behaviors.
Great. We have a number of questions that ask about, okay, what's next? How do we act on this data? So what are maybe some key takeaways that we can act on now? Or one question was, so how are we going to use this to answer that question of why be Jewish? So there's, you know, using this, thinking about what's next and setting expectations, I suppose.
Right. So I think there are a few areas that I think are, you know, to the extent that we make recommendations based on our work, there are a few areas that I think are really important to look at. One is the geography piece, where people are living in the area, right? 22% in the city, when I believe there's just one physical synagogue presence in the city, correct? Right, CRC is there. And so thinking about what are the resources, infrastructural resources that are needed where, you know, between a fifth and a quarter of the community live when there isn't that kind of institutional footprint. Thinking about do organizations, agencies need to set up a storefront? Are there any congregations that need to move? Do people need to start something new? Or are people living in the city and they're not really interested in institutional life and they're going to figure it out on their own, and the, you know, federation's role is how to support them in that. So the geography piece is one thing to look at. I think another is, I think I talked about figuring out and create those ways of supporting those households that are not in dire need now, but are close to it or one accident away from being there. A lot of times, right, a lot of attention and focus is on the people with the highest acute need, and by all means, that is deeply important. But there are also a lot more people who might need something like bridge loans or temporary loans or anything like that to get them through a particularly tough time, and might have an easier time getting back up on their feet. And investing human service agency resources into preparing to support families that might need it someday soon, but it's unclear when. You know, I think finding and encouraging ways to have civic conversations and civil conversations, rather, about Israel in the community is deeply important. We showed the data. You know, there are areas where people are in alignment, and there are areas where people are having a hard time finding commonalities with each other when it comes to Israel. And I think regardless of people's particular views, importance of being able to talk to each other, be in the same room with each other, is critical, given that there are a lot of externalities, and we don't want to, isolate ourselves from each other, no matter how, thank you, how high the temperature can get.
Great. Thank you. And I know sprinkled throughout, we did some comparative data, national. We used the Pew study. You looked at communities like our size community. Is there anything that you can extrapolate from some of that comparative data that would be of interest? I know one question someone had was around people not identifying as Zionist. Is that a number that's kind of on a national level, comparatively, or specific to St. Louis?
So on that particular one, I'm not sure. Okay. So Janet just reminded me, we did the study of Chicago a few years ago, similar dynamic in terms of that particular question. I think, we've, in the last 6, 7 years, we've done studies in the Twin Cities, in Cincinnati, in Kansas City. And one of the dynamics that we see in a lot of those, in all of those Midwestern communities is the one that I described near the beginning about the longtime multi-generational residents. That's, I think, a dynamic in a lot of Midwestern communities. And I think it's one that there can be a tension because, people who are new can find it really hard to find a place for themselves when a lot of people are maybe used to, things being done a certain way, or, even to, not to kind of generalize, but, this is how, we did it when my parents did it and my grandparents and so on. And regardless of whether or not that's actually how people are acting here, in many cases, that's a perception from the newcomers. And so figuring out ways, even if it's nothing at that explicit, but there's a feeling that many people are picking up on, and they wrote about in the survey to some of the questions. So however, fact on the ground that has been, there's a perception of it. And I think looking at how some other communities navigate those tensions can also serve as a reference point for how to tackle them here.
Wonderful. And we're going to wrap up a little bit, and if there are more questions, we do have an FAQ on our website, correct? We'll be sending it out, that you can ask questions and we will try and answer them. All of the information is on our website, so the full study. And you can really dig in mine, and we'll help you do that as well. And I guess one final question someone had was, for those who don't have family here in St. Louis, I mean, we talked about half of the 50% have deep roots. And for those that don't, was there specific data that you could share around those individuals who really don't have roots, don't have family, and how we can help them navigate?
Yeah. So I'm actually not going to draw on any on this particular study or any other community study that we've done to answer that question. But 8 or so, 7 years ago, I was privileged to do an interview and focus group-based study in Pittsburgh looking at helping them figure out ways that younger interfaith families with young children could find themselves more at home in the Pittsburgh community. And one of the things that came up is, Pittsburgh is another one. I don't know if that fits the definition of Midwest, but similar dynamic, longstanding, multi-generational ties. And one of the things that came up from the conversations and the work that I did there is that there were a lot of newcomers who came in for school, just like people do here, who don't have family and so don't know about what's going on. There isn't that sort of built-in natural resource for people to know what the organizations are, where they are, how they work, what they offer. And so one of the recommendations we made is to put a lot of effort into some sort of welcome wagon kinds of offerings so that people who are new can have sort of a buddy or someone to help guide them and explain the community to them in hopes that it would help them find a good fit for them in Jewish life. So.
Great. I think this is fun. Thank you so much to Matt and to Janet and to John and to Dahlia and to all of you for being here tonight and learning more about the study, just the tip of the iceberg, because there's so much to dig into. And we're going to actually spend the next couple days here in smaller focus groups focusing on education, focusing on human services, and Zionism, Israel and anti-Semitism, and all those components. So I just want to thank you so much. We're so excited that you're here. We're excited that the findings are out. And we're excited to work together to really continue to build a vibrant Jewish community here in St. Louis.
Thank you.